Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to Audiovisual Cultures, the podcast where we dig deep into different areas of the arts, media, and creative industries. I'm Paula Blair, and in this episode, I have the most fascinating conversation, which I hope is one of many, with Janet Sternberg. As you'll hear, Janet is a writer and photographer based in Los Angeles. We talk mainly about how Janet came to photography without really planning to back in 1998 as a mode of expression or thinking or being in the world while walking, while going for aimless walks around cities. We get into quite a lot of detail in thinking through what those acts of walking and photographing entail and reveal. But we really only scratched the surface, so I hope Janet will return when her next project comes to fruition. This time we're mainly talking about her photographic and essay book, I've Been Walking, and some of her earlier work, but she's already working on new things that haven't revealed themselves to her as we record. I must say, I feel so lucky to be making these kinds of connections, and I'm really glad that you can share them with me as well. I hope you learn as much as both Janet and I do from this talk. Actually, that's a really nice thing, is that Janet felt that it was important for her to say that she really learned something from talking to me too, and I love that. I love that this is happening on the show. Before I hand you over, a massive thanks to our glorious patrons over at patreon.com/avcultures, without whose support in all the ways I'd struggle really to keep this going. Just a quick reminder as well that all the important links for this episode, and if you want to become somebody who helps out the show, those are all in the show notes wherever you're accessing this episode. If you hear any banging at all in the background, I think I should manage to crowd them out, but if you hear any banging or popping noises, I'm recording this on the 5th of November 2021. I live in England. It's going mad out there with fireworks and all sorts. My poor next door neighbours, it's very quiet in there because they have a beautiful collie and he's not been having a fun week. So, you know, I think they've taken, a lot of the dog owning places in this neighbourhood are off somewhere else having a break. So apologies if there are any banging noises that are coming through that I haven't managed to get out of this, but it's that time of the year and I thought it was worth mentioning. I was going to leave this until a quieter day, but I'm on my own. May as well do something. I'm a bit scratchy because I've been talking all day. I can't concentrate on anything else, so I thought just get this done while we're there anyway. Just thanks so much for listening. Please do check out Janet's website and her books, and perhaps even do that while you listen to us describing them. Enjoy this episode. Janet Sternberg, I'm so delighted you're joining me today on Audiovisual Cultures. We've been trying to set this up for a while and now we're finally doing our recording, and it's just such a pleasure and an honour to have you. Very warm welcome.
Oh, how completely lovely. And yes, we have had a back and forth before we finally got to this, but I think it's been good in a way. You know, we've sent each other things. We talked a little bit from our respective homes. You in Ireland now?
I'm in England.
England, and I'm in Los Angeles. So I have a sort of feeling that this is not that formal. It feels simpatico.
Nice. That's lovely. So Janet, you've got loads of experience. I think we're mainly going to talk about your more recent photography. You've got a book out at the moment called I've Been Walking, a photography and essay book, but you've been a writer for a long time. You've been a researcher. You've worked in film and media and all sorts of areas. So you've just got a wealth of experience that we can learn from. And I'm so excited to get into a lot of issues that come up through your work today. Would you be happy to give my listeners a bit of an overview about you and how you would like to describe yourself? Would that be all right?
It would be, although it presents a problem because I've really never been any good at describing myself. No, I'm quite serious. I think it's actually a bit of an issue because people who do multiple things, they either have to condense themselves into a single description, and that makes people happy because they know who you are. It's clear. However, if you do a number of different things, often more or less at the same time, it reminds me of something that I read that I find very still interesting. There was a writer whose name at this moment is escaping me, but it will come back to me, and from the 1940s, who was both a photographer and a writer. And he did a very beautiful book of photography on the left side of the page and a novel on the right. And it was every page. And it was not illustrative. It was just somehow at just the right oblique angle to each other. And he went back to his publisher for hopefully a new book. And the publisher said, the world is not ready for an ambidextrous person. Maybe he said writer, maybe he said artist, but you take the point. And I think it is now. I think many, many more people, especially those a lot younger than I am, in fact, do multiple things and are not self-conscious about it. But since you asked, I am. Anyway, so to describe myself, well, I think, in terms of work, although there are many other angles to come into about myself, but in terms of work, I think I've actually, or sensibility maybe is better, that then became work. I think I've always been a writer. I mean, when I was a little girl, my mother says, well, my first word was book. I don't know if that's true, but it's a nice legend, a sort of fairy godmother gift, When I was 6 years old, I wrote something. I'm embarrassed to say what it was, but I will. I had gone to see Fantasia, the movie, you remember? And I was so thrilled by it that I came back and asked my mother for paper and pencil. The reason I'm embarrassed is that, was it true really that my my first writing was movie criticism? It was more about how much I loved it, actually. So that's been my identity. There have been many, many years when I ran away from that identity. I did other things, but underneath, the beating heart has always been the word. And I've always been interested in the word and the image, and I've made some forays in that direction. I did a film many years ago on the writer Virginia Woolf, a short film for public television. And there was an actor who was evoking Woolf, not literally playing her. But they were quite beautiful landscape, not England, but like England. And voiceover were her words. And after I did that, I realized that there has to be a better way of doing it because the visual and the words fought each other, And there were too many, maybe like I'm doing now, but too many words. And so trying to solve the problem of image and word is another piece of my life. And I think I might have made a real attempt at it recently with this new book. We can come back to that. But to finally end up the saga, not really. In 1998, I finished a book, and it had been 10 years in the writing, which is a little bit much, but then again, you asked me to describe myself, and I like to try to get it right. And I was in a very funny position that was new to me. The book was set in the past, historical and personal. And I looked up and I couldn't see what was around me, what was in the present. I could see it, but I couldn't feel it as something. And the upshot of this is I went to our second home in Mexico and set myself a little practice of walking every day without a goal, without thinking. And I saw a window and I liked what was in it. And I thought, I want to take a photograph. First time I'd ever thought that. And I went to the town square, and the only thing that was available was a disposable camera. A lot more to say about that if you want. But my life since 1998 has been very much photographer, writer, photographer, whatever else you want to add in. Photography is leading the pack now.
That's really informative, Janet. I think that actually it gives us a really full picture, and we can start getting into some details there. When I was reading through that piece that you're talking about, where you describe all of this happening, it really struck me that you were because it's very autobiographical, and it feels that your photography is that going that direction as well. It's a way of writing the self. It's a way of reflecting yourself. And I feel that there's a lot of self-portraiture coming through in very subtle ways in a lot of your photography. So I was wondering if that's something you had been thinking about or what you thought about that.
Well, to be honest, I'd love to know how you see that, but I will respond briefly. I think the through line through all of this is that the way I'm in the world is as a poet. That can sound so highfalutin, oh, poetic this, poetic that. I don't mean it that way. It's just how I feel and see the world in terms of being moved. I don't know how else to say it without sounding goopy. And I've always loved autobiography in general, not memoir. I don't like that word one bit because, and I refuse to call one of my books memoir, which was sort of stupid because booksellers, remember when there were bookstores and shelves, they didn't know where to put it. But I really felt memoir, and I've said this before, so excuse me if it sounds canned, but it's me, moi, me, moi. No, that doesn't interest me. What does interest me is all the levels and prismatic facets of the self in time and space and history and connections to other kinds of thinking. So I kind of think that everything I've done in photography is as a visual poet. And I think as such, the images reveal that facet of me. Having said that, I would like to know how you see an element of an autobiographical self in the work. Can I ask you that?
Of course, yes, absolutely. When I read your text and when I look at your images, it comes across to me that it's how you see. It's given you this avenue of ways that you can start seeing both the world and yourself in the world. That's really what strikes me about a lot of your images. I really love you telling your own story about how you even came to begin doing this. It's really spontaneous. It's very much, you strike out, you go for a walk without a real purpose, without a direction, without a destination. You're just doing the act of walking. So it's quite performative and live in that sense. And I'm really interested in live performance art as well. So it kind of takes me down that area. It's sort of about life and art in life and about play and not really planning anything, but spontaneity rules, contingency rules. And that idea of you just felt so compelled suddenly to take a photograph and to just make an image out of what you were seeing. I think that's where, to me, you're documenting how you were seeing something at that time. That's what you felt compelled to do. And then the act of finding, right, where can I get a camera? And so you get a little disposable camera because that's what's available to you. And then you discovering that there are limitations with that, but that's a really special box of limitations. And again, that's how you're seeing the world and making art out of something very everyday. That idea really strikes me as well. And again, for me, that very much relates to the art-life relation that's in live performance. So there's a liveness, there's a spontaneity to the photography. It's not planned out to death, but you, I suppose, like poetry comes to us in those ways as well, where we're evoking an image and we're putting that into words somehow. So I'm really starting to see how your images are poetic in that sense, if you know what I mean. So to me, that's where it's autobiographical. It's how you see, and it's helping you realize how you see the world. So it's, in a visual culture sense, it's a way of seeing, but it's specifically your way of seeing in that moment, at that time, in that place. And I think there's something really fascinating about that that's really worth delving into quite a bit.
Well, I hope a lot that I get some sort of a transcript of our conversation, because what you're saying is something I would like to have and to go back to. And I think it's very astute. When I hear about elements of autobiography, I tend to think somewhat more narrowly that, because I'm not a documentarian in any way at all. And I think that this question of how I see, which of course then devolves to how you see or anybody else sees. But that is kind of exactly what I care about. I think of a few more things to say about what you just said. And one is that I've always followed my own path. And sometimes, most of the time, I think I can say at this age, I'm 78, that it worked out, like everybody, many a bump in the road. But I have said, well, maybe I'll get an MFA in writing. This is when I was in New York. I lived in Manhattan for many, many years before coming out west. And, well, maybe I'll do that. I'd already worked for some years in the quote unquote other non-academic part of the world. And I went up to Columbia and I sat in on a class, and everybody in the class was looking toward the professor, who was a very well-known published poet. And it seemed like we were kids and they were vying for his approval and they were competing against each other. And I walked out and I had a sort of a modest migraine headache on the way back, walking to my apartment in the Upper West Side. And I thought, no, that's not me. That's not for me. I can't do that. So I did something else. I studied with one person, a poet whose work I admired, because I thought that his approach, which was very straightforward, would be very useful for me because I can get fancy. I don't want to get fancy. So everything has kind of been like that. And so there's no orthodoxy in my life, which I've only realized relatively lately, but it cuts to the next thing. Two more things. One is the idea of starting an art form late in life, which is what I did with photography, because I love the way you're describing the spontaneity, but I think that can only come at some level when you don't have a great big critic standing on your shoulders, And we've all had that, whoever's listening who's, had been in the world of art making for a while. And that's really great about late life work. You can just say, okay, I'll just do it. I'm not going to subject it to a whole set of questions about whether I can, whether I have permission, whether I'm good enough. And that's really something I wish I'd known younger. I think it would be a great thing to have as young life photography, but it didn't happen until later. And the last thing, the third thing, is I think a little bit of what you're talking about is what I love and think of in poetry, whether it's word or image or whatever. And that's a world that's associative. I really love documentary work and revere it actually as a form of witnessing, political and otherwise. But that's not what I'm doing. I'm going, and without thinking a lot about it, it's like, yes, this is something that really, I know it's in my territory and it relates to this and it relates to that, none of which I'm thinking at the time. But it's an associative way of being in the world and making leaps rather than logical connections. So I think that's where that comes in for me as well. Long answer in many parts, sorry.
Not at all. No, this is what we're here for, to talk all of this out. That's exactly what we're here for. I just wanted to pick up on what you're saying about this idea of being late in life and coming to something, because I think this is something we need to talk about more and more as a society, really, is what does it even mean to be early or mid-career or emerging? A really good friend of mine, she's sadly no longer with us, but she was in her 70s and she made this point to me many times that it's never too late to begin a new art form, and we're constantly emerging and evolving and becoming, so it's a really interesting thing to think about, being late in life. In a way, it has this connotation of, I didn't come to this soon enough. And I want to just trouble that a little bit, because I think, well, actually we come to things when we're ready for them, and there shouldn't really be a timer on that, if you know what I mean. So I just sort of wanted to float that point a little bit, because it seems like you've come to photography at a point where you were ready for it and it was ready for you and it was on your terms, so I just think, that's really important to own that and to go, the boundaries don't have to dictate to me how I make and how I create and how I see things and how I be in the world, so I think it just made me think of that. I don't know if you have a response.
Oh, I do. Of course I do. There's a really interesting article in the last month in the New Yorker magazine by Louis Menand. And he's writing about how we, broadly speaking, obviously the West, and certainly the United States as a culture, like to think, well, it's Generation Z or Generation X to which we attribute certain qualities. And by the same token, he talks about, well, we like to think of the 60s and the 70s and characterize those in a certain way. But he was pointing out, first of all, that the generational thing shifts and changes. And it's also a vast generalization to talk about, well, Generation Z is more benevolent and more political. You know, it's just a way, it's like saying I'm a writer as opposed to I'm a person who does many different things. It's a way to have a handle on the world, but it's not a true handle. At least that's what I felt very strongly reading him, and I have felt it at other times too. It's a way of being reductive of the complexity that is in the world. There is this phenomenon that people have written about late life creativity. And isn't it interesting that Willem de Kooning had Alzheimer's, yet he could paint so wonderfully when he was in his, 80s, I don't know the years. I guess so. I think that's pretty interesting. What drops away, perhaps, not that Alzheimer's is something one wants. And I mean, that's not what I mean, obviously, but that what drops away is, I think, a bit of what I was talking about earlier, and that's strictures that one has imposed on oneself. And there is a freedom. And what greater luxury in life is there than to feel free? That said, I think I am recognizing something that everybody recognizes, especially if they're self-reflective or somewhat almost intuitive, and that is that there really are stages that one has to recognize. And I think for quite a while, now I'm going to be very personal, those of you who are listening, but I feel like it, and you've got a lovely face, and it's nice to feel that I can be that. But for quite a while, through a complex of reasons, parents, home life, whatever, I wanted to be known. And I wanted to have my work liked or admired. Now, nothing is terribly wrong with that. I was never any good at pushing my work in the world, but it has itself gone into the world to a very small but real degree. And it's been greeted. And recently, one of my books, the archives for it, was acquired by a wonderful archive, and gives me great, great pleasure to know it will go on. But right now, I am in the middle of another stage, and I'm trying to figure it out. When I say I'm in the middle, I mean it. I'm not out on either side, but it suddenly feels as though I don't need any of that, and that doing it and wanting it is running counter to what's right for me now. And I think COVID played a big role in that, because for a year I was able, and again, please, anybody who is listening, I do know how unbelievably fortunate I was during this year, and most people were not. But I have an apartment, I have dogs, as you know, and in no way to consider equivalencies. I have a husband, I have a life that was to a large extent on Zoom. But the freedom not to have to be social, just to be quiet and go and look and read, put me back to what I was like when I was 9 years old, when I would take paper and pencil and whatever and go up to this monastery across the street from us. I'm Jewish, but the monastery had this tremendous allure because it was very lyrical, very beautiful. I was self-conscious about being Jewish in the middle of all of that, but that's neither here nor there. I was kind of exalted when I would go up there. And that's what I was feeling that year of COVID, that it was a return to that little girl. And she's who I want now. So that's a stage. I mean, it's obviously I can't have her again, but I can look toward, I was happy finding her again. So right now I'm involved in doing a fair amount of things to make the book happen in the world. I've been walking that book, which is available on Amazon, etc. I'm moving right along. You know, and I have some wonderful events coming up. I'm doing a book signing at a gallery, very good photography gallery, a week from Sunday. And they asked me who I'd like to be in discussion with. And it was an easy answer, but an odd one. This person said, yes, he's really a genius, I think. Antonio Damasio, the neuroscientist, whose work has had a great, really important to me. And then we became friends. So that was a thing on top of that. So this is by no means a complaint. What could be lovelier than sitting in a terrific gallery, talking in front of people and exchanging ideas with Antonio Damasio? So it's not a complaint. It's a kind of, well, you know how people used to go around with forked sticks looking for water, dowsing, you know? It's like I'm dowsing myself now.
That's a fascinating way of putting it. And I really understand what you mean when you're connecting with that young version of yourself that's still in there somewhere. I think, well, maybe a lot of us have done that. I hear about a lot of people discovering their inner child and doing, it might sound strange, but enacting self-parenting and trying to have a connection with their young self again. So I really understand what you mean when you say that. That's a lovely way to go about it as well. I was wondering if we could talk a bit about the technology, because I think what's interesting here is almost a lack of tech in your photography. And that's the point. It comes to mind as well. You talk about the sense of freedom that you have. And to me, I think then of autonomy. You have a choice to be autonomous, and just folding that back into the idea of autobiography and it being about the self. There's self-discovery happening here. There's self-reflection. There's self-awareness happening. It's really fascinating to hear that you're discovering a lot about yourself, and there's an emergence of yourself coming through, and not just you at this age, but you at previous ages as well, as you look back, as well as be in the here and now and look forward. So there's really something in that, I think. But again, I think just thinking about the cameras that you've been using. So previously you've been using disposable cameras, but then moving into iPhones. And I mean, we very much associate the smartphone with taking selfies. You do that, but in a very different way. It's a very different way of approaching a self-portrait or a selfie, or marking yourself in the world, marking your journeys, the unplanned nature of your journeys. I think I've been walking, when you sit and really be with those images and you start to recognize, actually, there's some patterns here. There are different shapes that are emerging. There's how you look at how space is taken up, how you see yourself in reflective surfaces, and you just about catch those. You might see yourself in a car window being reflected, or you'll see just a snippet of somebody going by on a skateboard and you'll take a fractional image of that person, or you'll see some water but through a hole in a bit of concrete. It's how you frame things, and how that is dictated as well by the relatively restrictive framing of the phone or the disposable camera. And you talk quite a bit about focus and how you don't actually have control over focus, and it's maybe quite a flattened image and that sort of thing. So again, it's coming back to, it's how you see, but also we can't really change the focus of our eyes. We see what we see, and it's a bit like how these cameras see as well. They can't really do anything too technical with how they see either. And you relate that with the human eye, which I think is really lovely. I think, again, you're sort of back to basics, but you're really pushing the limits of that basic technology, if that makes sense. And I was wondering if you have any further thoughts on that and what your thinking is on that, and if that relates to anything else that's come up in your thinking since.
Yeah, I do. Sure. The first thing, I just want to go back to the image of the skateboarder, which is just his legs in a window above, because I just want to talk briefly about feeling. The way that an emotion becomes a feeling, to be more precise. I've just been rereading Damasio, for those who know his work. I was wandering around, and there's a large plaza nearby. I live in Little Tokyo in downtown. And there's the Japanese American National Museum. And then down this long, it's really a pedestrian street, but it's quite a wide one, is the Museum of Contemporary Art. And it usually has lots of people. And during COVID, there was nobody. And when I saw the pair of legs on the skateboard, of course, I recognized that it was a remarkable image, because above that is glass that is semi-reflective, and it almost makes the upper half of him look not only as though he's only part human, but almost as though he's bursting into flames because of the kind of red gold of what's above him, and then the strange bricks to the side, etc. But the feeling was first of he's alone. He's a skateboarder, usually something that's done in some way in a context. There was no context. And so I just want to begin by acknowledging something that I think isn't spoken enough about in photography, and that is the emotion of taking a picture, the feeling of taking a picture. I think perhaps it's not part of the tradition of photography, which has been to a very large extent, not completely by a long shot, but in the hands of men. And I think men are not that comfortable talking about feelings. That may be archaic, so be it. But I do think that it's time for that to enter into the world of seeing. The other thing is, I just want to be very, very clear. I have the greatest respect for people who really are technically magnificent. And there are a lot of them in photography. And sometimes I prefer to say, although it's confusing, well, not really a photographer, I'm an image maker, because that doffs my hat to the people who work within the traditional exquisite means of photography. And I do, in a sense. I mean, there's a lot of composition, there's a lot of how light falls, there's a lot of juxtaposition, all the traditional elements of photography, the necessary ones I work with. So it's not like I'm a naive in the world wandering around. Going back briefly to the disposable, because it has no depth of field, as you know, because there's only automatic focus, it took me away from the initial thing that photographers, I think, tend to do and learn, and that is to say, I like this, I'll make it sharp. I don't like this, I'll blur it. And if you can't do that, another world unfolds, and that's everything in the frame being of equal value. And although I am not a Buddhist, I read a lot of Buddhism and I think about Buddhism. I don't practice it necessarily, but I think it is a somewhat Buddhist approach to refuse the hierarchy of values that one can very easily impose in photography. Kind of comes with the territory. The other thing is that when I was in college, that's a picaresque story, but we won't go there. I studied philosophy, and I'm still really interested in philosophy. So when I saw those first images from the disposable, not only did they interest me as images, but I realized that out of those several things which I've mentioned, the no depth of field, the no focus, I was getting something that I hadn't seen before, although I didn't think of it that way. Other people have said that. Because when you're working with reflection, which I was, there's always in Atget and Friedlander, I mean, these are great, great photographers, but you know where the photographer is. You know he's standing somewhere, and you see that in the image, and you understand the space between the photographer and what he's looking at, etc. And what I saw I was getting was something that had none of that. That what I saw was this, particularly since I had no strictures against blur. I loved it, actually. And I love passages and looking closely at complex images and seeing how things interpenetrate, that I was evolving a philosophy. And it was a philosophy about mind and about, in a certain way, politics. Because if you give up the idea of sharpness, if you give up the idea that everything has to have, in effect, a line around it, you find that you're giving up the idea that the world has to have borders and boundaries. And you're also moving into a territory that says, well, I may need those borders and boundaries, but my mind doesn't need them. My mind is porous. And so out of that came not just a way of seeing, but a way of being. And that was really, really important to me for quite a long time. And again, I think that traditional photography, people don't quite talk that way. I'm a little outside of the discourse. And that's just fine with me. Going back to your earlier point, it's a kind of freedom to come and say, well, yes, seeing, yes, feeling, yes, thinking. It's all a part of the process. And so I really loved developing what I'm telling you in 2 minutes, which was in fact a number of years. But in those years, the optical was replaced by the digital. I couldn't get things developed. I couldn't get things printed. So I did go to the iPhone. I mean, I'm not very technological. I can work with a computer, but I don't manipulate my work. And again, that's not exactly anti-technology. It's not anti-Photoshop. I just like to work with how I'm seeing, to go back to your phrase, and not try to turn it into something that exists between me and the world, which is my manipulation of the world. That can be a bit naive sounding if for those of you listening who may be interested in philosophy, but it's also true. I mean, anyway, true at the level I'm talking. When I got to the digital, I started with like an iPhone 4. I'm now working with an iPhone 10. But I continue to get what I want. With the new book, I'm sure you noticed a lot of the work isn't interpenetrating, isn't porous, isn't reflection. And I clearly have moved into a phase that says I can have both. I can do things that are more, well, this is what I see, and more, this is how I think. But many years ago, a wonderful man who really cared about my work said, Janet, you really have to start with a better camera. And I thought about it, and some other people have said it. And of course, the criterion is, are you getting what you want? And if I am, which I am, at this point, why learn the whole apparatus of what is in itself a very technologically important art form, but it's not the way I want it?
That's a really excellent point. And it strikes me as well that when you become reliant on the technology does the heavy lifting. You're using very powerful cameras, or you're working with different lenses and you're choosing a different lens. It becomes the apparatus that is forming the image, and you're really just pointing it up and it does all the rest of the work in a way. And not to at all to denigrate that, but it's not, as you say, it's not what you want. It's not what you're looking for. And there are lots of people out there who are doing that, and they're doing it extremely well, and they're making incredible images like that. But that's the thing, it's you making it. So it has to be in the exact medium that you want and need it to be. And I think there's a lot of aesthetic value in that, maybe the less, the sort of mid-tech, it's not even low-tech, it's pretty decent stuff. The iPhone cameras are incredible, I think. The old iPhone I have is the best camera I've ever had in my life.
Oh, wow.
I'm pretty happy with it. Do you know what I mean? Because I know exactly the sort of disposable cameras you mean, and I used those a lot when I was a teenager, in the 90s and the early 2000s. But I love that aesthetic. I actually really like the aesthetic of those older photographs and the sort of lower quality photographs. I quite like, this is very strange, but I quite like bad photography, inverted commas, because there's something spontaneous about it. There is something totally unique about it. It's an image that's maybe unplanned, and there's something actually quite unique and special about that I find. That's not what you're doing, but that's just a personal interest of mine. I just like the contingency of things. I suppose on that, to just push a little bit with then the act of the photography, so the more performative side of it. So especially with I've Been Walking, I mean, what came first? Did you have the idea that you wanted to do that book and it be about that theme? No. Or was it you were finding that you were just going walking and you were taking photographs and it came from what you were just doing?
Either, actually, but I want to go back for a second.
Sure.
Because I think that what links the people who do this remarkably technologically advanced photography, I'm not talking the people who manipulate, I'm talking about the ones who, I suppose, quote unquote, straight photography. And what I'm doing is that the link is that we're ravished by the world. We're ravished by color and texture. And sometimes I'll see something. I wish I could think of a good example. I think a little bit of my friend Joanne Callis, who's just a master at the textures, well, all the things that classical photography, although her vision is not classical, it's very much her own. And I look at it and I think, God, that's so beautiful. And it requires so much knowledge to do that. this is not putting down myself. And it isn't saying that I don't have a sophisticated take and that I know that I can capture in my way the ravishment of texture and color and the world. I'm really just pointing to a link between low tech and high tech, and that we're both using it, I think, for this sense of wanting to, what's the word I'm looking for? Ravishing. I think you saw in the thing that I sent you, I write about something called the gasp. And you're out in the world and you see something and you just know at an almost instinctive level, this is it. This is what oh my goodness. Oh yes, gasp, click. Again, between the gasp and the click, there's composition and other things, but that becomes sort of self-evident after a while. That kind of came naturally. So I don't want to make a large distinction other than one of honor and respect between the people who capture the world through very high degrees of technology and the very simple forms that I'm using, because I think we're both responding to the world and interpreting it in the same way. Well, I'm trying to recall, because you were talking about several things. One was the technological, in a sense, versus, and I know you were not, again, as simplistic as that, but my really wanting to talk about the link. But then do you remember what else you were saying after that? Because it interested me.
Yes, there was a bit of a chicken and egg question. Is how did the book come about? I've been walking, so...
Yes, of course. Well, again, the word organic can be such a cliche, but I do believe in it in a very particular, almost biological sense, I started walking out and I started taking pictures and I got interested in them, and I do what we all do, which I just love. And that's bring the stuff home, look at it. If it seems promising, think about it, print it out on the home printer, try it next to other images, try to see what they're saying as a group, all that kind of thing. And I did that every day. And I realized pretty much every day that I was taking pictures and I was posting them on Instagram, which was a new thing for me, under a rubric, and it said empty city. And some people, not vast amounts, people said, these are unusual images and there could be a book. So that's when that became a real possibility, as did something else. And that is the initial feeling that I had of seeing emptiness and despair. And as I write in the introduction to I've Been Walking, the extinguishing of people's aspirations, which has a particular pathos for me because I've seen it in my parents' life, all of that stuff started to evolve. And I didn't quite know what it was evolving to. I just was taking pictures. But then someone said, and they were right, it's not so much emptiness and despair or whatever that you're seeing. It's human traces in the middle of that. And that went, oh, yes, that's right also. So like any project, it becomes. That's what I'm trying to describe. I didn't say, I'm going to do a book about COVID. No. I'm not even an about person. I just kind of went out there. But it became, again, to maybe repeat too much, but, a way of seeing during that time. And then I've been lucky in terms of my professional, I suppose I have to say career. I'm not too fond of that word, but it is a reasonable word and it describes something special, because good things have happened, like, someone seeing the work. That person was from Germany. She happened to be at my home. She happened to be familiar with the world of photography. We kept in touch. She said, I'd like to bring these images to a publisher. They said yes. And then that was in 2016, essentially, give or take. And it became, I think, a really wonderful monograph where wonderful people who I didn't know, it was very exciting, wrote about my work. Notably, I will add this because, like Damasio, I'm still thrilled with this association, the director of Invendors. And I had his email, and that came about because of definitely a piece of good fortune. But I sent him work, and he said, yeah, I can see my way to writing about this. And I don't know if you've seen that book, but it's a huge 4-page prose poem, because the book is big, and it's about seeing and photography, and then about my work. It's quite a thrilling piece. With this book, after I felt I had enough, I sent some images to that same publisher. And they said, yes. Who knows what makes the world turn in one's favor or go the opposite direction? But these are examples of that. And I loved working with these people. And, it was all between Berlin, where they were, and here in Los Angeles. And so it was all online on Zoom. Had a marvelous designer who we were in the same wavelength. And the team, the production and editorial team, could say to me things like, well, I don't think that's as strong an image as that. And I'd go, oh, yeah, I think you're right, or no. So we made a book. We made a book. Very short time, a year and a month. Well, all but 6 of the photographs were taken, and all the production, which I think is kind of a record for art books. Not that I was trying to set one. I think it reflects perhaps the urgency and immediacy of that period. But yeah, it became a book.
Wonderful. It's great that you've cultivated such a productive relationship then with the publisher. That's brilliant to hear. So Janet, I'm wary of keeping you any longer. You've been so generous with your time and all of your ideas and everything.
I just have to interrupt and say, what's really great is when you're given the opportunity to think new thoughts and be honest about them. And in this particular, sometimes one is canned, you say things you've said before, and obviously some of this I've thought about and said before, but I do feel that in this particular conversation, I said some things that were new to me, which means I learned something. So I have to just tell you that it isn't just generosity. It's pleasure of it.
Oh, that's really wonderful to hear. Thank you. That's great. I'm so glad that you feel comfortable enough and that you feel that you've learned something as well. I certainly have learned things, and that's what this podcast is all about, is everybody learning things together. So I'm so glad that that's happened, really. And we mentioned before that we're really just scratching the surface, I think, here. And I know you need to go. So you're so welcome back anytime. I've loved this conversation. I will love to have more conversations with you. I think you're fabulous, and your work ignites something in me. It ignites that intellectual curiosity that reminds me why I got into all of this in the first place.
Great. That's kind of it, isn't it? That's what you want. I like your word. I tend to think of inspire, but I think ignite is just a marvelous word. And if we can do that for other people, that's just great, passing on the spark. I will tell you, I know myself very well. I get absorbed. And that means that I probably will not raise my hand and say, Paula, can we do this again? But if you want to, would you contact me? And I will say yes in a heartbeat. I'm just telling you the truth about me, because I know I just get absorbed.
Absolutely.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you.
Very quickly before you go, I know you've got a website. Would you just point our listeners to your website? I'll get it in the show notes, but if you just say it for them, where can we find you online?
Well, I'm going to say it, but I have to say something first. Nobody knows how to spell my name right, so I'm going to tell you. It's Sternburg, Sternburg. Everyone, I won't tell you what everyone does because I want to plant it in your mind, but Berg as in city, Star City is how it translates. I kind of like that. And because I have a house in Mexico, I sometimes want to say, sí, yo soy Juanita, or not yo soy, but Juanita de Estrella de Ciudad. But I don't say it, but I like that kind of way of thinking about my name. Moving back to, so if you know that, you can find me anywhere. I have 2 websites. One is for photography, and it is www, if you want to think that way, janetsternbergphoto.com. Janet Sternberg Photo is one word, and it's lowercase. And then I have another one, and it's for writing, not surprisingly, books. And that one is www.janetsternberg.com. So it's not hard. And I have a nice Google presence, so I can be found. On the writing website, there's a link to the photography one. I should, one of these days, make the link go back. Maybe yes, maybe no. So I am findable. I would love to be found by and large. On the photography website, up at the top is my email. And that's it.
Wonderful.
Thank you for asking me about that.
Well, thank you so much for doing this. And I think I definitely will be in touch with you possibly in the new year, and we'll get into a lot more stuff, I think.
I'd love it. I'd love to know what you're doing. I'd love to fill you in on new work. I'm going to show you something. Hang on. I know our listeners cannot see this, but what I'm holding up is a plastic sheath of, the kind of thing you can slip photos into. It's give or take 8.5 by 11 spiral bound. And here it is. I'm holding it up. And, just in the way that one puts oneself, writes a little, I don't know, something. It just says new.
Awesome.
And so in it is the stuff ex post I've been walking. And so, of course, I look at it and I'm trying to find out what it's about.
It'll find its way.
All right. Lovely. Thank you so much, Paula. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Janet. Bye-bye. Thank you.